Now, on BBC One from Bristol, Question Time with David Dimbleby.
Tonight on Question Time, Baroness Jay, Leader of the House of Lords, Dr. Liam Fox, Shadow Health Secretary, the Liberal Democrats Education Spokesman Phil Willis, author and columnist Yasmin Alabai-Brown, and the Bath Rugby Union star and former England captain Phil de Glanville. Good, well, thank you very much. Hello, welcome to Bristol, a very fine city which we haven't been to for a long, long time, far too long. So it's very nice to be here. And we'll take a first question straight off from Amanda Hunter, who is an administrator. Amanda Hunter.
Taking account of the lengthy adoption procedures in England, should it be advisable to use the internet as a fast-track way of bringing a child into the family home?
The Killshaws adoption, of course. Liam Fox.
I think the first thing to do is to improve adoption inside the United Kingdom itself. There are a lot of children who we could adopt in the United Kingdom and a lot of parents who would adopt, and yet the bureaucracy and the problems that we have in the system don't allow us to match the two up. But I think when it comes to the internet, I think the thing I find offensive about it is this concept of almost treating children as fashion accessories. I want a baby, therefore I will buy a baby as though you're buying a new pair of shoes. I find that really quite disgusting. And I think that...
What makes you think they're doing that when people are desperate for a baby and look on the internet? Why do you say they're buying one?
Because they did buy a baby. That's exactly what it was. They paid money for someone else's baby, and I think most of us just feel it's what Boris Johnson called the yuck test. It fails the yuck test, and we don't like that. And I think that we need to make sure there are measures in place to stop that happening.
The babies were advertised on television here in this country.
Yes, David, the problem is that unless you make the child at the centre of the adoption process, then you'll get it wrong. You mustn't put the parents at the centre of the adoption process. If you don't put the child's interests paramount, then the adoption system won't work properly.
Margaret Jay, should something be done to cut the time it takes to adopt in Britain so that this doesn't happen?
I think a great deal needs to be done to speed up the system. This may be the only time in the evening that Liam Fox and I agree, but I absolutely agree with him about making the child the centre of any adoption procedure. That's why we've just published a white paper which is going to lead to an early bill to speed these things up. This was done just before Christmas. The other thing which I think is important is in this world of global communications, the internet and all of that, it's very difficult for individual countries to try to get their standards used worldwide. And that's why I think it's very important that something called the Inter-Country Adoption Act is going to come into force later this year, which means that standards of adoption in this country, if people bring babies back through the internet or through purchase or whatever it may be, they do have to meet our standards, and I think that's going to be a very important safeguard.
So you could strike America off, because there are countries that strike off. You could say no adoption from America.
It doesn't work quite like that. What it means is that you can't simply, as Liam was saying, you can't simply take a fancy to a baby on the internet and go out there and purchase them and bring them into this country. It's very unclear how these parents, for example, quite got the babies in, because it would be hard to do that through the normal system. And then what you will have to do is to prove that you've met our pretty exacting standards on adoption. Now, some people say we've been too exacting and that we need to loosen up in some ways, but we do also need to make sure that the children are at the centre of it, and we need to make sure that we improve the rates in which children can be given a permanent, secure home when their birth home isn't working. And I think just to say one thing about people who are so desperate that they do these things, which is, as we've heard, people find pretty reprehensible, is that you do have to remember that the extraordinary statistic, it's always made me slightly open my eyes, but I believe it to be true, that 1 in 6 couples in this country who try to have children naturally don't succeed. And so the adoption procedures are important. We do have to have compassion for people who can't have children in a natural way, but we do also have to be sure that we protect the rights of all children insofar as we can.
I'll come back to you in a moment about what was particularly objectionable about what they did, because they seem simply to want children to go to the States to find them. But what do you think, Phil Glanville?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say about don't blame the internet. I think the internet has transformed our life and will continue to transform our life. And I don't know exactly the details about how easy it is to adopt through other channels, but I'm sure that if the Kilshaws are desperate enough, they'd have been able to adopt a child through other channels. The point about child welfare coming first is dead right, but look at the internet as just another way of providing an opportunity for a child to to grow up in a happy family environment. The problem is safeguards and checks. That's the problem with the internet, full stop.
Did you think that you're speaking as an internet salesman?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of. But did you think what happened was disgusting, like the Prime Minister did, or do you think they did the right thing?
I think obviously it's been portrayed as disgusting, and because there was money transacted. I think that's the difficult thing about it.
Because the money didn't go to the parent, the mother. It went to the agent.
She said it did.
The man in the front row there. Right.
I like to say I agree with Dr. Fox entirely. The internet is so dehuman, and these are young people's lives we're dealing with here. Surely, in the wake of the fact that history is so poor in our schools, surely we should give these people the best start possible.
Okay. Amanda Hunter asked a question. What do you think?
I agree that it's mostly the adoption procedures in England that do need to be reformed, but I also think you can't blame the internet. If people are being refused sometimes for minimal of reasons that they might not be able to understand properly, it's no wonder that they go looking elsewhere.
Okay, man in the front row here.
Doesn't the well-being of babies take priority over hunting?
Over hunting?
Yeah.
Well, we may come to that. We may come to that later on. So,
Can I just say one thing? One of the other things is these babies are going to grow up. They're going to become difficult teenagers. What are the parents going to say to them? We won the Cabbage Patch Doll competition to get you. Do people think ahead as to what happens with it? Adoptions fail as many times as they succeed. And I think it's very short-sighted.
What is sad, David, is that there was a bill, a private member's bill, Mark Oaten's bill, which went through Parliament just last year, to actually deal with this very issue and to insist that any child that came in from abroad for adoption did in fact have to meet the exacting standards of Social Services Department, and the parents had to go through exactly the same vetting process. That bill has passed through both houses of Parliament. It has sat in the government's coffers. It has not been put into regulation, and therefore there will not be the sorts of checks that should have been. And it's quite disgusting to actually have this sort of sale of children across the internet with all the hype that's gone through right across America. And we now hear this evening that they're going to make a film of it. And no doubt Spielberg or somebody will make it into an epic drama.
So it's the government's fault for not having put through the legislation that's there?
The legislation, as I said, sorry, Phil, I think you've got it slightly wrong. The legislation is coming into force this year, and in addition, on the basis of the white paper which was published just before Christmas, there will be a new broader bill, which thank goodness we had in train before this case came up. You asked me, David, why I thought this was particularly difficult. I agree with Phil. It's not about the internet, it's about the exchange of money for human beings. It's the trade in a market in babies, which I think is the reprehensible.
It's also the fact that it was turned into a media circus, largely by the parents, and I think a lot of people find that offensive. It had everything but Jerry Springer.
But in practice, are you saying, Margaret J., that this couple who could bring these twins in, and then social services in Britain would say, well, you've got to take them back to America? To whom? To what?
No,
How? Is that what you do?
That is not the situation. The situation is that they would have to pass, as indeed you just said, they would have to pass the exacting standards of British adoption
Having brought them into
procedures.
this country, so they'd be in this country.
Yes.
And then if they didn't pass the test, what do you do with
I
the
think
babies?
that in practice, what normally happens is that if the parents do, as it were, have a legitimate case for bringing them in, and there are many, many inter-country adoptions from China, from Romania, I'm sure we all know about them, I certainly know about some personally, which have been very successful. The emphasis will always be on giving the benefit of the doubt to the parents who've had the initiative to do this. This is not the same as being critical of the situation where people are trading in babies. It's the market aspect of money for babies and so on and so forth, which I think people do find pretty
These two small children have got
extraordinary.
6 months visitor passports.
Exactly. How they got those are very odd.
Yes.
Well, they got those from the British government, presumably.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on.
Hardly since they came into America.
Right. We've got a lot of questions tonight, and I want to keep moving if we can. Michael Rawlinson is a director of a design company. Rawlinson.
Thank you. By ducking out of the television debate with William Hague and Charles Kennedy, is Tony Blair ducking out of democracy?
Ah, right. Phil Willis.
Well, unless Tony's got 400 of his backbenchers behind him cheering and shouting, of course, then he's not prepared to meet anybody anywhere. The reality is, in this situation, here was a glorious opportunity. Democracy needs to have a new dimension. We are seeing fewer and fewer people wanting to go. We're seeing fewer and fewer people actually going through the ballot boxes and wanting to engage in democracy. And here is an opportunity which we saw work in the States, where the televised debates were interesting, let's put it that way. And what we now have is an opportunity to have all three party leaders, the ITN and BBC, both agreed a network formula to actually do that. Charles Kennedy agreed willingly. William Hague agreed even more willingly. And here is Tony, well, chasing away.
Right. What about the Scottish Nationalists, Plaid Cymru, the Ulster Unionists, the UK Independence Party?
Well,
why shouldn't they all be involved in that debate?
Because they're not UK-wide parties. And I think if you went into Scotland, then of course you would expect the Scottish Nationalists to be able to have that sort of debate. If you went into Wales, you would expect Plaid Cymru to have that. But you can't
UKIP, I think, is doing every constituency. So perhaps they should, I don't know whether they're expected to get to number 10
I
or
hope
not,
they will fight my constituency.
Yeah, okay, Yasmin Al-Bayram.
I think it's a very unfortunate decision, because whether it's fear, and I don't see why Tony Blair should be afraid to debate with perky little William Hague. I'm underimpressed mostly by the very scripted performance in Parliament, and that is the basis on which he's constantly applauded. But more importantly, we'll have to listen to this gloating. He's left us to the mercy of the gloaters. I mean, Ad Widdicombe and all these Tories are going to gloat about it. It was unnecessary. It would have done him no harm.
But was it ducking out of democracy? In other words, now, in the television age, is it a democratic duty?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think television debates have limited value. But I think what it has done is it has given an impression either of arrogance or cowardice, and both are very unfortunate.
Okay. The man in spectacles with the blonde hair, or white hair, might say. Let's call it blonde.
Is it not the case that Tony Blair is actually hiding from his poor pre-election pledge record?
Margaret Jane?
I don't think so, because I'm not sure what the pre-election pledge was. But going back to the
card, we had it last week.
Going back to the point that Phil was making, I think it's a bit odd in Bristol, Phil, if I may say so, to say that Tony Blair doesn't like to meet the people, because I know that one of the very successful... One of the very successful... I don't know whether it was actually in this hall, but one of the very successful meetings that he's had, of a series of meetings around the recently with a whole group of people like this, was in Bristol last week, and I think every opportunity will be taken to meet further.
She also mentioned...
Well,
but that's not the same. That's not debating with William Hague.
You, David.
No, he's going to do that anyway, but it's not debating with William Hague.
Well, he debates with William Hague every Wednesday. How many people here watch Prime Minister's Questions? So I think we have to ask the question, do we really want to go down the American route?
And shorter.
What?
The Prime Minister's question time has gotten shorter and shorter.
Margaret Jay, you can't be making a comparison between 3 or 4 questions of Prime Minister's questions and the full range, the full glory of government policy being debated issue by issue,
well, David,
NHS, transport, health.
Well, David, let me say, and I hope this doesn't sound disobliging, but of course, I mean, you and indeed your brother would obviously enjoy having the television debate, as indeed would a great many people in the media.
No, I'd rather have them to myself.
Well, but I think there is a serious point here. It's funny in a way, because one of the things that the Labour government's been attacked for has been for being presidential and for not taking much notice of the parliamentary democracy and the way MPs function and so on and so forth. Here we are. We have a situation in which what it seems to be, from what people are saying and what David's trying to persuade us to believe, that it would really help our parliamentary democracy, where the general election is about electing 650 members of parliament, if we try to change it into a kind of pseudo-presidential election. I mean, we're going to have pregnant chads before we turn around.
It's what you wanted in 97.
But Parliament...
well, hang on. It's what you wanted in 97.
It's not what we wanted in 97.
What you asked for in 97.
No, if you remember, the whole of the 97 initiative or discussions broke down on exactly the same basis as this one.
Peter Mandelson wanted it, but maybe that doesn't sound very... Let's let the man in the blue and yellow stripe.
I think he's just realised now how much he's alienated most people in this country over the last 4 years, with farmers and people that drive cars and just everybody. He's just completely alienated everyone And I think he's frightened.
I think it's just frightening.
If you really think, if I may say so, with interrupting again, if you really think that Tony Blair is frightened of William Hague, I do suggest you watch Prime Minister's Question.
Phil de Grande, what do you think?
I mean, speaking as a non-politician, I mean, I can understand why Tony Blair doesn't want to do that, because you know, he's got everything to lose and nothing to gain. But as a non-politician, it would certainly make sure that the issues which are around for the general election get to a much wider audience than they would if they were just in the papers. And I think a lot more people, if it was hyped up, and a lot more people would see it and actually at least have, you know, more of a general understanding of the issues that are around today. If they were just left in the papers, you wouldn't have it.
I don't know who Tony Blair thinks he is. He is, after all, a servant of the people, and it shouldn't be up to him whether he decides whether or not he appears on television. He should be there answering our questions.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with him. He shouldn't have the choice.
Well, you mean kind of point of a gun, you mean? You have to march into the studio and sat down and told to answer.
No, but listen,
I think that most people in this country...
Let's get this straight. I mean, of course, there will be a whole number, just as there was in Bristol last week, of this kind of discussion, which I would have thought people in this audience would find much more interesting.
You made that point already.
No, but he's making the same point again.
I think that most people in this country now find our politics simply too staged and too phony, and they would actually like to see it without the script writers, without the cheerleaders behind them, and actually to see what they're made of. And I think that's for Tony Blair to say he doesn't need to come onto a TV debate because we have Parliament to scrutinise the government is the ultimate in hypocrisy. There's never been a government that's shown such contempt for Parliament and its procedures and cutting down our time to debate in Parliament. And I think we've got a failed Prime Minister who's now adding cowardice to the list of charges against him.
A lot of hands are up, but any Labour supporters, Blair supporters, who think he made the wrong decision by not doing the debate here? You, sir, in the white there, yes.
Yeah, I think that if Blair had done the interview, it would make him more accessible, and if he were to do it, he could come across as a strong leader if he were to do well on the actual interview.
Okay, and the man at the very back there, you, sir, with the spectacles, and yes.
Yes, I personally think that Tony Blair has a lot to lose by not appearing on TV. And he knows it too. That's one of the main reasons why he's refused. And I think if you're going to put him with a debate against William Hague, you'll find out that William Hague would actually beat him to the ground on it.
I was asking for... I mean, the partisan point is obvious. I was asking for friends of Blair to speak. Yeah, you, sir, here, the press.
Why do we have to go down the American road to elections?
Okay.
And we've seen the result of the last election in America that is no good at all. This country has one of the best democracies in the world, and I think our elections are very fair without these debates.
Okay, right. Let's move on from that. Thank you very much. I just would just add that he has been invited, and I think probably, or hope will, accept an invitation to be on Question Time, as will William Hague and Charles Kennedy and the... no, I didn't forget his name. Oh, no,
because they'll talk to real people rather than just to each other.
Well, yes, there we are.
Charles is a real
just before we...
real people in
all right, before we go on, now you must come and take part in Question Time, particularly as we're moving towards this general election. It's getting more and more important that you should come and take part, and the number to ring if you want to and have things to say is there on the screen, 09011 114 411. We're going to be in Southampton next week, and on the 1st of February we're going to be in Carlisle. We haven't been there for some time. So if you'd like to do either of those programmes, ring the number or apply via the website, which is there, and you can also take part in this debate by getting hold of us on that website. Let's go on to a third question, and this comes from Alan Moore, an actor, and may bring you in. Alan Moore.
Isn't it rather hypocritical of this government to spend so much time on banning fox hunting, while also Jack Straw is in the process of bringing new laws in to curb animal activists?
Margaret J.
Well, I think the two are consistent in a sense. I mean, the fox hunting bill is obviously designed as a measure in which everybody has a free vote. The question about animal activists as they relate, for example, I imagine you're talking about the Huntingdon Life Sciences issue, which has become a very critical one and is one I'm glad you brought up. Because there, you have seen the difference between legitimate protests and legitimate differences of opinion, as we certainly saw in the debate on fox hunting in the House of Commons yesterday, and real attempts to disrupt a company which is actually doing work which is very, very important. Now,
it's legitimate cruelty, surely, to the animals.
Well,
let
me just say that I think that the point of all of this is that, of course, everybody is concerned to minimise the cruelty or the suffering that people perceive as happening to animals. But I think also you have to see on the other side the enormous benefits in terms of drugs and so on that these experiments do produce. We have been right in the forefront in this country of doing this kind of research. And if we slip back because an organisation like Huntingdon Life Sciences is driven out of business, as seems to be on the edge of being, which is really quite an appalling thought, then we do not only lose jobs, we lose initiative, but we also, and I think this is the crucial point, lose the ability to produce the pharmaceuticals which have such a beneficial effect.
Is there any difference in the cruelty caused to the animals by opponents of, believed to be by the opponents of fox hunting compared with what goes on at Huntingdon?
Well, I simply don't know about that, but what I can say about the animal experiments which are done at places like Huntingdon, because I was involved in this a little bit when I was a minister at the Department of Health, is that we've very much tightened up the regulations on the way in which animals are used. Animals are no longer used, for example, in tobacco tests or cosmetic tests. It's only about pharmaceuticals and things which have a direct positive benefit to the population. And we are now the most regulated, probably quite rightly, country in the world as far as these kind of animal experiments are concerned.
Alan Moore, does that answer your question?
Oh, not really. I think there's horrendous cruelty in to animals, and also a lot of cruelty in abattoirs, which people don't seem to protest against.
Well, I think the point is that we always have to look at the balance, and of course people feel very strongly about that. But I think in the case of the research, which was the question you raised, and this particular company, which is the one in the news, I think you can see the benefits as well as the downside.
Is it true that the Home Secretary is going to introduce tomorrow amendments which would lead to restrictions on intimidatory picketing and protesting and all the rest of it?
Well, that is something I know that the Home Secretary is looking at in the context of the new bill which is being introduced, as you rightly say, in the House of Commons tomorrow. As you probably know, he's already given £1 million to the Cambridgeshire Police, because one of the things which I think is very disturbing about the protests which have taken place, and again I say, I know how strongly people feel about this, is it's been about intimidating people in their homes. It's been about standing outside people's front doors, scientists, people who are doing work which hopefully does produce things which are beneficial to us all.
Phil Glanville?
Yeah, I think the whole thing with the animal testing is that obviously it's out of sight, out of mind for the majority of us. Most of us have never seen it, so we don't understand the full cruelty of it. I've never seen a hunt and what happens to foxes either, so we don't understand the stress that a fox would go through. But as far as the activists are concerned, if they got a disease at some stage which a drug that had been developed that somewhere like Huntingdon could cure, would they not take it? I don't think so. So I think their whole activity is totally wrong.
But do you think it's hypocritical to go for the fox hunters and not for the Huntingdon operation? In other words, to protect Huntingdon and not protect the fox hunters?
I think, like you say, there's a balance to be found there, and I don't see that as hypocritical.
Okay. The man in the third row there, you sir.
I don't find it hypocritical at all in the fact that how many people does animal testing and pharmaceuticals benefit? I don't think there's one person sat in this room who won't have benefited from that. How many people have benefited from fox hunting exactly? I don't think you can say it's hypocritical in the least.
Okay.
When's Mr. Blair going to ban the sale of rat poison? He wants to stop hunting and everything else. What's more cruel than a rat eating rat poison we put down for it, taking 3 or 4 days to die? Everybody forgets about that. They want to ban hunting and all the rest of it, and pharmaceuticals.
I think there's a big difference. It seems to me that fox hunting is simply about willful cruelty. Delia Smith doesn't teach you how to cook and eat fox. If people ate fox, I would have no problem with it. I think if some good came out of this, hard though it is, it would become acceptable. As it is, if it is only for the enjoyment and the pleasure of people, we could come up with an alternative. I think we should make foxes in factories with blood and guts, and even getting them to cry, because there's jobs in, create drag hunting with life-size foxes and get all the pleasure.
Drag hunts chase human beings.
No, we make foxes. We can make real
You want
foxes.
to substitute foxes for human
Yes,
beings?
and we make jobs, factories with real life, because it seems to me that there is nothing else that we view in our society which is simply as an end in itself.
So
and I think this country has a great tradition in respect for animals. And as an immigrant, I've learned a lot about it. And it's a shame if on this one issue, this fox hunting thing becomes the only tradition that the country wants to protect.
The only time I've ever agreed with Anne Widdecombe, and I say this with great humility, was when in a fox hunting debate with
people don't usually mean that when they say it, do they?
She said if people enjoyed hunting so much, why don't they go to Africa and let the lions chase them? I thought it was a wonderful line. And I say that with a smile because of all the things that this government could have brought before Parliament in this last session. This was the one thing which they've decided to make a high-profile issue of. And there are so many other things that are so terribly important. And I have to say that there is a fundamental difference. I have a major laboratory within my constituency, and I have seen the effects of these animal rights activists. I have been subjected to their abuse as well, and people having excrement poured through their doors, threatened with nail bombs and the rest of it is totally unacceptable. And I know this because I visit the laboratories on a regular basis, that virtually every drug which is being tested at the moment, they have to test because they are required to do so by law. And whilst ever there is a law which says they must test those drugs, then I will support those companies. Okay. What I can't support is, in fact, chasing animals purely in the name of sport.
All right. The woman in the second row from the back. Yes.
I agree with the gentleman that's just spoken. I think there needs to
Phil
be...
Willis.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. There needs to be
Liberal
a distinct
Democrat.
difference. I'm not going to vote for you. There needs to be a distinct difference between the gratuitous fun of the upper classes in fox hunting and the hard work of the people who actually test drugs on animals for the sake of human
Class
beings.
issue for you, hunting, is it?
Well, the only reason I say that is because the only time I've ever seen fox hunting on television is Prince Charles and his son William.
Right. And you're against them on those grounds?
I'm against fox hunting, but I think that testing drugs on animals is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, the man in the front here.
Well, I have been hunted by a lion in Africa, so, and I think it's very clever of the BBC to have both a fox and a jay on the panel tonight. But I would hunt the one and shoot the other because they're clear. For the jay, but there is for the fox. Can I just make an important
kill both
point,
of them, in other words, yes.
The fact of the matter is that once a democracy allows majority prejudice to ban legal minority activities without sufficient reason, democracy is diminished.
Ian Fox? Despite the fact he's chased you and eaten you, you can answer the question.
I think that most people in the country would regard, in terms of animal experiments, there being a very big difference between experiments on animals for the sake of developing cosmetics and for the sake of developing life-saving medicines. And I think most of us would draw that distinction. And I don't think you can actually live in a civilized, law-abiding society when you allow law-abiding people who are going about work that will benefit others to be terrorized by vocal and sometimes violent minorities. And I think that the odd thing, Phil's absolutely right about the government making time for a fox hunting bill, but not actually making time in this session for either a bill on mental health or adoption, both of which I think were more important. But I also think that at a time when our police are already overstretched, especially in rural areas, to criminalise what are otherwise perfectly law-abiding citizens will do nothing for the maintenance of law and order overall.
How did you vote?
I voted for self-regulation, I voted for the compromise, and I voted against the total hunting ban.
Did you? The woman in the second row there.
There was a time when bear baiting and cockfighting was legal, as was child labour. It's time for us to move on and outlaw fox hunting and hunting with hounds.
Okay. It's a free vote in the Commons, Margaret Jay. When it comes to the Lords, as leader of the House of Lords, how will you vote?
I will probably vote as Liam Fox did for the regulation of hunting.
For the middle way?
The middle way, yes.
You won't shoot him now?
No, he was going to snare me, I think. I was going to be snared.
But, so you're not against fox hunting?
I really feel, I think I'm probably one of the relatively few people in the country, I feel rather similar to Jack Straw on this, who said in the debate that he realised and he accepted that there were very passionate views on either side, and I respect those greatly because, as the gentleman who asked the question showed, there is very great concern about animal welfare. I happen to be perhaps one of the few people who don't feel terribly strongly pro or anti on this, and I think the middle way which has been proposed may satisfy a lot of concern.
And in your new legitimate House of Lords, as I think you called it, more legitimate House of Lords, would you have any objection?
I called it that.
Would you more legitimate, greater legitimacy?
But never more legitimate than the House of Commons.
No, exactly. Will you have any objection yourself to the House of Lords preventing it becoming law?
I think the point is that we are talking about a very hypothetical situation because we haven't got the bill out of the Commons yet. We don't know. I mean, one of the interesting things about the House of Lords is that if you do have a free vote, as we certainly will, you never actually know what's going to happen. And if you ask me to speculate about when it's going to happen, you're asking me to speculate about whether there will be a general election very shortly, which I'm obviously not going to do. I think the point is that we shall see what happens in the House of Lords and we shall then have to make the decision. But I would always say, being only an unelected member, and I'm very conscious of my very secondary role in that sense, that whatever my personal views, that the views of the House of Commons, of the elected members, must be preeminent.
So the House of Commons having voted for abolition, your way of expressing the preeminence of the House of Commons is to vote against what they voted for when it reaches the Lords and say you're for the middle way.
No, this is an individual vote. Individual members of the government in the House of Commons voted because this is not a government bill. This is not a bill on which there is a government position. The government is neutral. All of us are quite able to take our views. As you know very well, David, the fact of the matter is that often in these situations where there is a conflict between the two houses, a bill will go backwards and forwards. Now, as I've said very clearly, and I'm very consistent about this, of course, in the end, the preeminence of the elected house is the right one.
But then, I'm sorry, this is not fox hunting, but I mean, your duty surely is to support what happened in the House of Commons, particularly as Labour's leader in the House of Lords, and to say they voted for abolition, we go for abolition. No?
What's the point of having two houses, David, if you're not allowed to express different opinions? And we had a free vote in the Commons, we have a free vote in the Lords, we have a bicameral parliament, and that's the whole point of it.
One has no democratic legitimacy at all.
One last thing, do you think it ever will be abolished?
What do I think? What will
fox hunting.
Fox hunting. Well, as I say.
But the House of Lords.
Following on just from what Philip said, which implied that it was all nonsense. I really did wonder if you'd moved on to the House of Lords. Fox hunting. As I say, I think it is quite impossible to speculate at the moment what's going to happen. There is obviously going to be the bill come to the House of Lords, whether it will run out of time, whether indeed, as we know in the House of Lords, not only do people have very free votes, but they have very free procedures. Whether or not it is held up for a length of time, we shall simply see, and frankly, am not prepared to speculate.
And would you like to see it? One last question, I promised to leave it. Would you like to see it in the manifesto, in line with what Tony Blair said on Question Time a couple of years back? It will be banned. Would you like to see it in the manifesto?
That is a question for the party. That's not a question for the government.
You're a senior member of the party.
But this is not a question for the government.
Be scared to say your view.
Certainly, I'm not. I've said my view. My view.
TV live.
I've made my personal view very clear indeed. I can't do more.
Okay, let's go on to another question. Thank you very much. And this comes from Natalie Wilson, who's a student. Natalie Wilson.
In the current situation where the dignity of patients is compromised daily, why are we so shocked by the treatment of dead bodies?
These are the bodies that were found on the floor of the chapel in the Bedford Hospital. Yasmin Alibi-Brown.
I think it was the photo, really.
Yes.
It's so much of what happens in hospitals and mortuaries is never in the public sphere except on television programs. And I think we were truly shocked because of the image. I think it was the image that shocked us. And I think it was quite right that people were appalled. But probably there was something odd about the degree of outrage when there's so much going on in our hospitals at the moment, which is much more important, it seems to me, including the fact that so many of us are going to get out of the hospital iller than when we went in. So maybe this is transference, you know, kind of this is the easiest way we could express our fear and horror of...
I mean, the bloke in charge resigned, didn't he, immediately?
Yes.
Do you think he was right to do that, or was that overreaction?
I think he was scapegoated a bit. I think from all evidence, he was a very good chap, and he did the honourable thing. But I think, you know, it shocked me, the degree of horror shocked me, when there's so much about hospitals at the moment that should be worrying us a little bit more, I think.
Liam Fox?
Well, I think that most of us, those of us who work in the medical profession, excepted of course, don't see death. And I think it was the fact that people were not used to seeing it was shocking. And I think there's also another point here, and that is, you know, when you die, in a sense, you don't stop being a person. You're still somebody's loved one. And I think most of us looked at those pictures and thought that could be our parents or that could be our brothers or sisters. And we would not like to see them treated in that way. There was something offensive deep down about seeing individuals treated that way. And I think it was a question of dignity and respect. And respect, I'm afraid, is a word we don't often use enough when we talk about patients or those who've died in our health care.
Natalie Wilson, what do you think?
You've got people staying on filthy mixed wards. It's not really that surprising that there are shortcomings at the other end of the system somewhere else as well.
But, I mean, do you think the attention was focused on the wrong place?
Yes, I do. I think there are many more problems to deal with other than the problems when the vessel is out of use at the end. Bodies are just something we're in at the moment, and I don't think there's something we should be worrying about when there are people dying because they can't get the operations they need.
Margaret J?
Well, I think it's a question about dignity and respect, and I agree with the point you made that we need to show more dignity and respect all the way through the way in which we treat people in hospitals, and I feel very strongly that the point that you've just made, that patients shouldn't be being treated on dirty wards and so on, is something we need to put a lot of energy and a lot of time into, and I'm very glad that that's now happening. It's certainly something I think which is long overdue, because I think one of the things about the health service, I always remember a very senior nurse saying to me, the point about the health service is they can change any organ in your body, but they can't necessarily find you a pair of clean pyjamas. And I do think that sort of what in the old days you would have called kind of a tender loving care approach has been something which is rather gone by the board in some places. And I do think now that there are the resources, the financial resources in the health centre, in the healthcare service, to make sure that those standards are brought up to scratch, that we do need to make sure that the management is right at the local level. And that's why I don't know this individual man who resigned in Bedford. But that's why I feel it was right that he should resign, because I think it was a question of management, and we need to be sure that those standards are very much kept up at local level.
David, we can't allow Baroness J to get away with that.
Why?
And nor can we allow Liam Fox to get away with this.
Get away
this
with
was
what?
a manifestation of under-resourcing our health service, not just for the last 3 years, but for the last decade and a half. And I felt desperate for the relatives of those people who in fact were paraded across our media, and if I might say so, Liam, paraded in the House of Commons for pure party political manoeuvring. This was a situation which you are seeing, sadly, not that exact situation, but situations like it in hospitals up and down the country because they are grossly under-resourced. We are seeing cleaning in our hospitals at an all-time low because of the private sector contracting, which in fact does not allow the matron or indeed the sister on the ward to actually say that bed needs cleaning again, because they're not allowed to do it. And we have reduced our health service to a system of subcontracting as if it was rail track, and we know what happened with rail track.
Hold on. Just wait a second. You can. You're both saying you want to come back, and you both can. But I just want to read out what the medical staff committee at the hospital said when Ken Williams resigned. They said the chief executive has been made a scapegoat for the chronic underfunding of the pathologist services that gave rise to the deplorable state of affairs in our mortuary last week. That's what they said.
Well, I hear what they said, but I do think, really, we do have to make the Liberal Democrats face up to some of the things that they say. He says you can't get away with that. In fact, £30 million was given last summer. Another £30 million has just been committed this week to precisely the point which the person who asked the question made, to clean up the wards. There are changes being made. There is a move in the right direction.
They don't seem to reach Bedford Hospital
staff. Well, that is the problem. Exactly, and that is the problem with the health service, is you get pockets of absolutely first-class practice. You get the resources being used properly, and then you get places where they're not.
Okay.
Now, I don't know enough about the Bedford case. I'm always hesitant to say that. But I think to say that it is about national underfunding when there's actually been specific money for the specific purpose of trying to deal with this issue is quite...
Okay, I want to bring in the man at the very back there. He's about to fall over, or is it a woman? I can't quite see.
A lady.
A lady,
Hi.
yes, a lady. Hello.
Hi. Given the comments that Baroness Jay has just made, how does she then justify the abolition of the community health councils, which is the NHS watchdog for patients?
Okay, and the woman Sudan in orange.
Yes. You say 60 million is a lot of money. You spent over 900 million on the Millennium Dome when that's gone into our essential services.
Okay. Man in the blue tie.
Speaking as an architect, I fall about laughing, ironically, when these issues come up, because one sees a shambles, a collection of buildings that ought to be pulled down, and the order of investment is not enough. It's infrastructure we need to invest in, not...
Okay. And the woman in the brown, with the brown hair and the brown shirt.
There are moves being made towards improving hospitals, and how can we now also have, a lot of people have to travel a lot farther to get to their hospitals. Like my grandparents have to travel, instead of having their local hospital in Kidderminster, now have to travel 15 minutes to Worcester, which is ridiculous.
And the woman on your immediate left.
Well, I worked in the National Health Service 28 years and 10 years in the Army. And then I became a civilian because I really found very difficult to cope with the civilian life in the hospital. And I have worked in Labour's time, Conservative time, again Labour time. And the conditions have been getting back to work. Resources, not the nurses and the doctors were never, their welfare is never thought. They were overworked, underpaid. Now, even how many resources you put, where the nurses are going to come and how you are going to treat the patient and keep maintaining the standard of care.
Okay. Well, now, Margaret Jay came back. You didn't come back on the attack from Publilis. You've heard an attack there on both parties if they're handling the NHS. Do you want to answer it?
Because I think that the thing both these cases point out is it's not just about money, it's also about priorities and values. And the hospital management had been asked by the consultants in Bedford to spend money on the mortuary facilities. The money was there. Margaret is right to the extent that they weren't short of money. But the management wanted to spend the money on getting the waiting list down more quickly because that suited their political masters. That was the point here. It was being run for political, not clinical priorities. And the second point about the cleaning of the wards is that's not also about money either. When I was a junior doctor, if the ward sister said, Liam, wash your hands, or Liam, put on a clean white coat, I did it. But nowadays, we don't have the discipline that we have, and we must, in my view, get back. And I think we made, I know you're going to say that changed under the Conservatives, and you're right. And that was not the right direction, and we have to go back, in my view, to what were matrons' values of discipline and cleanliness in the ward.
Very, very brief point, leaving aside issues of funding in the NHS, because, you can argue about it till the cows come home, how much money you spend on the NHS. The fact is that the picture should never have been taken. What goes on in hospitals, there are probably far, far worse things that go on in hospitals. Let's just leave them to happen there. We don't need to know about them.
I don't know about that. I think in a way it was quite important
There's a
for us.
murmur of disagreement about that.
I think it was quite important for us. We see images of Africans in body bags. We see images, and we never think these things can happen in this country. I think it was a very important image for all of us to be confronted with.
Okay, the man there.
Surely, if there are major problems inside a hospital where people, dead bodies are lying on the floor, we need to know about that.
Yes.
I completely agree.
And the man behind in the blue pullover with the secretary.
I don't think we should be sweeping the dirt under the carpet. That's been going on far too long.
Okay, and can we reach the woman there with the curly hair?
Baroness Joe said that changes are going to be made. I think we'll all agree that's far too late for thousands of people. Some changes that I would like to see is the present government and the past government actually taking some responsibility and not blaming it on management. Because there's only so much managing you can do when you've got so little money.
Okay, I'll take one more point from here and then we're done.
I do actually think it's very disrespectful to put dead bodies on the floor of a chapel. However, it's not quite as despicable as taking organs from dead children.
Right, now, look, I think we'll move on to another question now. I'd like to get this one in and another one if possible. Alan Hughes is a teacher. Mr. Hughes?
Money is corrupting sport.
Does the panel believe that money is corrupting sport? And presumably this is in the light of the Bruce Gobelin case today, is it? I mean, was that what triggered this question?
It's certainly an issue.
When he had his £85,000 libel damages awarded after a jury trial overturned. Do I come to you first, Phil Glanville? I think I probably do.
I think so.
Yeah. I don't know about rugby union. Is rugby union corrupted by...
Well, rugby union's only been professional for 4 or 5 years.
But they go on strike, don't they now? The rugby union?
They do, yeah, but that's to do with their employers, the RFU. I've certainly never come across any corruption in rugby union. We have only been professionals in sport for 4 or 5 years, so who knows, somewhere down the line that may well happen. It's slightly difficult to happen in rugby, where obviously there's 15 people in the team. Slightly easier to happen where it's an individual sport or where the teams are smaller. I find it amazing that someone like Bruce Gobelin has done this, because the amount of money that they're paid anyway, why do they need to take even more to corrupt the game?
Doesn't corruption come the more money there is around rather than less?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's corruption in every facet of life, isn't there? I think it'd be foolish and naive of us to think that it doesn't happen almost everywhere. As I said, it hasn't happened to me in rugby. I'm sure it exists somewhere.
Is the spirit of a sport like yours being damaged by money starting to come into it? I mean, do you regret rugby union beginning to have people receiving fees and all the rest of it?
I certainly don't. No, I certainly don't. Salaries.
Salaries.
No, I don't at all.
You don't think it hurts the sport, or you don't like it?
No, I don't think it hurts the sport. I think it had to come for us. The difficulty is the fact that amateurs were running the game. It became a professional sport overnight, and the amateurs were still running the game and still are. Obviously, there are going to be difficulties down the line. There have been for the sport of rugby in the last 3 or 4 years, but for the player, it's been fantastic.
Okay. Does the panel believe money is corrupting sport? Liam Fox.
Well, I think that when there are very large amounts of money at stake, individuals are always going to be more tempted. But the thing that I find really upsetting about all of this is how we as a country seem to take one individual case and try to extrapolate that to everybody else involved. And I think that the lack of corruption in our sport says a great deal about the integrity of our sportsmen, and I wouldn't like them all to be smeared in, I think, the way that sometimes is coming across here.
What do you think cricket is clean, for instance, do you?
I think
South African cricket.
Well, I think David, you can always find examples, but I think in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of our sportsmen are decent and honourable, and I wouldn't like to see them denigrated.
Okay. And go to the gentleman in the dog collar at the back there.
I'm just somewhat surprised that people suspect that money doesn't corrupt. All money corrupts. Our discussions this evening have been virtually all about money and its corruption.
Okay. Phil Willis, you want to comment on that particular point?
I think if £5,000 corrupts a South African cricketer, £5 million may have some effect on the Conservative Party.
Perhaps you don't have to worry about that temptation. That sort of temptation will be coming your way.
Well, I don't know what I would do with that temptation. But
I thought the Liberal Democrats were asking for money and were rather excited by the
We were very grateful for your donation, then. And can I say that the thing that is corrupting sport in terms of money, I think it requires a serious answer, is the way in which soccer is my great interest. And when I see now a David Beckham saying £100,000 a week is not enough, then I start to get worried. But I'm even more worried that you cannot now go with the family to any Premier League ground in this country and actually go and watch a game. And that's what money has done. It has taken sport away from people. Okay. And that's what I regret.
The lady in blue there.
I feel that sportsmen are so highly overpaid, given, this is really what's creating the wealth gap in this country. You've got nurses at one end, teachers, the ordinary everyday person, getting really low pay, and then you've got these phenomenally paid. And the other thing is, whether they win or lose, they get highly paid. And this is why we never win any competition. if they get paid as much
Okay, Yasmin, just quickly.
I so agree with the gentleman at the back that money has corrupted more or less every single thing we do. And more than anything else, it's corrupted our own sense of well-being and having a contented life. Nothing seems to be enough. And certainly